ethics in death, and I know we've already talked about death some, and John talked about death. And this is the whirlwind tour of death this morning. What do you want to know from a medical perspective? What questions do you have about death and medicine and healthcare, if any? And I'll either try to answer them today or I'll try to answer them on another week. But is there anything in particular you want to hear from a medical perspective?
What is the American Pediatric Association?
Well, there's an American Academy of Pediatrics, and there is an American Pediatric, what are they called?
Some kind of authoritative association from time to time.
That's the American Academy of Pediatrics. That's the 67, 70,000 pediatricians. There is a much smaller society that's Christian that was started to actually to deal with the sort of anti-spanking, anti-parental authority attitudes that came about, I don't know, in the 80s or 90s from the American Academy of Pediatrics and others. And has morphed also into now dealing with transgender issues and that sort of thing. That's a much smaller group, to which I do not belong because I don't agree with some of their tactics. Some of their tactics are really worldly tactics and attacking rather than being an alternative voice for an alternative viewpoint. They were a little too strident in sort of their advocacy. I know some of the people in it. I'm friends with the former president of it. He's an endocrinologist in Atlanta, pediatric endocrinologist. So what do you make of it is they go along with the world and the way the world thinks. And the stuff about anthropology we've been talking about last time and today, that when the self and the self-actualization of your identity and yourself becomes the most important thing in the world to the exclusion of all other things, you end up in all kinds of errors. So I have friends who gender affirming care is a big thing in pediatrics, and that people honestly believe they are helping the child, but it's because their perspective on what is healthy and what is good and what is what promotes human flourishing has changed, and it's now the self. And you see the same thing with physician-assisted suicide. Physician-assisted suicide doesn't happen because doctors went into the profession to kill people. They went to the profession to help people. But now, because your self-actualization is king, and if you don't want to live anymore, that's what helps you the most. And if my job is to heal you and help you, and you want to die, then is it my job to help you die? Because that's what's best for you. Does that make sense? So they go along the way the world goes along.
Yeah. There really are that many people that really believe those things that are really pushing that stuff.
Yeah, but it's like it is in culture. There's a very, very vocal minority. It's not the majority of people. And government, it's the majority of people in academics, perhaps, but it's not the majority of Americans don't believe women should participate in, men should participate in women's sports. Majority of Americans don't believe that. Majority of people don't believe in all this other stuff either. But enough do to get into power and change rules and be very vocal and then try to get the culture to change. And the culture is affecting them and they're affecting the culture. And so, anything else? Hope that answered your question. That's a complicated question. Yeah, I think it's just a further development, the downhill slope of human culture, depravity.
God is superior and outside of us.
Right. And you elevate the human. Yeah, now we have technology that allows you to try to say, I'm a man trapped in a woman's body. Well, now there's scientific, technological things you can say, but it is just an extension of the human being more important than anything else. It's Romans 1.
who see themselves apart from God's party, to reject the people who are struggling with X, Y, or Z is not viewed as compassionate. So you've got a local minority that's pushing the agenda, and then you've got this kind of wishy-washy middle that doesn't want to be seen as a bad person, and because that's what we want in this society, right? To be fluid people, right? So you're sort of forced to go along with this idea that affirming all these things that are wrong, according to God's standard, is a good thing to do because that's loving, and that's setting our own standard of goodness above the standard of Christ.
That's all very true. And that vocal minority, the cultural elite, will attack you and say you're not loving, you're not kind, you're evil, whatever, because they're very good at driving the culture. And so now you're, banished from academia.
What you were saying, Romans 1, and that's exactly what it is, seeking their own ways apart from God.
Right. So God gave them over to the debased mind, and then God gave their bodies over to the debased behavior. So, yeah, and you don't want to be chastised or ostracized and that kind of thing. So I've chosen to stay in those realms because of all the Christians. It's like all the Christians leave public school, all the Christians leave every institution. Then there's no redemptive voice, and there's no voice for anything else. So I'd rather be the Christian, trying to lovingly speak truth and push things toward truth, rather than I can't just take this anymore. But I may come to a point where I can't handle some of them anymore. I'm about to be president of the Georgia chapter of American Cancer Pediatrics, and it's putting me in some interesting positions. So, anything else from a medical standpoint you want to know?
How big a group is that?
2,000.
Just Georgia.
That's just Georgia pediatricians.
Is that the biggest?
Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics is 67 to 70,000.
Is this a chapter within that?
Yeah, sort of. It's an affiliate. It's its own end of state corporation, but it's affiliated with them.
But we have an official here in Henry County that has certified that you're officially dead, right?
Yeah, the coroner.
Right, so that, in the history that you read about this issue, that was a big deal. People being afraid of being buried when they weren't really dead. They were in a coma, perhaps. Some people survive in that state for a very long time. None of their body functions work very much until they go through a great deal of rehabilitation when they come out of it. But I think that's one of the issues I think of. Is that person really alive? What's working?
Yeah. That if you want to talk about medicine and death and stuff, the Hippocratic Oath that most doctors still take one version of or another, although it's fading because of cultural issues. And it's been changed a lot. We actually wrote our own in medical school. We were the God Squad. There were 9 or 10 of us came to Christ, plus all the other Christians. We were all in the same rotations because we all needed the summer off to go to a mission trip. So they hated when we all arrived on their rotation. So we were very vocal. But we wrote our own version of the Hippocratic Oath to say, and had our own ceremony to say. But the ancient Greek and Roman cultures were right about a lot of things, and the Hippocratic Oath says, among other things, that you won't cause abortion, that you won't cause anybody to die, that you won't kill anybody. Doctors have always had the power to kill and heal, right? According to your own moral precepts, perhaps, or according to your own pocketbook. I can probably think of ways that doctors could, I suppose I could, kill somebody without it being found out. Not by neglect or by whatever. Like doctors always had that power, especially way back when you give them this medicine, you give them poison or you give them something that's supposed to cure them. So the Hippocratic Oath has always said that medicine was a moral profession. It was a moral enterprise, and that you were to do certain things. It was a covenant. You were in a covenant, not a contract. You were in a covenant with your patients to care for them, to put their needs above your own, to serve them. And it adds things about society and serving professionally, teaching others the art of medicine. But healthcare has always been that way until recently. The whole physician-assisted suicide thing is a huge debate still. Most ethicists still sort of say physicians should not be a part of that. But it's moving toward physicians can be a part of it if it fits in with their moral code and their cultural code and their upbringing and their own philosophy. Again, you change the definition of what it means to be human and what it means to be a person and what's the most important thing about being a person. And when it becomes the self and their actualization above all things, if they feel like they can be most authentically themselves if they're dead, then are you obligated to help them do that? So it really goes back to the anthropology and doctrine that we've been talking about. And those, I've been surprised by a lot of things as I get more and more involved in broader healthcare issues. These people who believe some really wacky things that we really disagree with genuinely think they're helping people. They really think they're helping people. And so it's deeper than just, and you can't just address it from a moralistic perspective. Like moralism is bad for parenting, and it's bad from the pulpit, and it's bad in culture. You can't just tell people this is wrong because God said so. That's not going to get you anywhere. And it's not going to teach your children how to think and make biblical decisions and the why things are wrong and that sort of thing. So we have a lot of work to do. Anyway, so this is a whirlwind tour of death. I'll try to get to some of the medical things, but probably not, maybe not today. This is the heart of the matter in life, right? Because we die. If we didn't die and we didn't have pain and suffering and decay, which all are part of a pathway to death, what would be the problem, right? Everything would be great. So this is what puzzles philosophers. This is what puzzles theologians. This is what causes problems for us as human beings, right? Because there's death. And really the whole thing about healthcare and science and medicine is prolonging life, preserving life, restoring life, relieving pain and suffering, right? It's still dealing with death. You're trying to put off death. And you're trying to put off the process that leads to death. And we as humans tend to push this aside. We sanitize it, right? Talk about passing on and all the other things. Christians and non-Christians, we want to sanitize death and not think about it. And there's theological reasons for that. And even as Christians, we have to have two minds about it, right? It's wrong for us as Christians to think death is okay and death is just natural. It's, the Lion King in the circle of life. That's wrong. It's not natural. But by the same token, it is inevitable. It is our lot in life. It happens to everybody, and children and adults all need to be prepared for this is part of being human and try to understand it. And precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints, right? So there is a good that comes out of it in that we get to go be with the Lord, but it's bad. So you really have to have all those things in tension. We talked last week about this sort of diagram about theology and who God is and who we are, and anthropology and stuff. We're not going to get into all that today, but some of this is helpful as sort of a background. But when God created us, how did he create us? I'm sorry? In his own image. And what did he make us of? Right, dust, right? He created the earth. It was good. It was very good when he created man. He created us out of the dust, right? And what does the Bible say? To what you will return? To dust you will return, right? He formed us out of his own creation, this body, right? And then what did he do with that body? breathed the breath of life into it, right? So we talked last week, you are not a human with a body. You are your body. And you're not a human with a soul. You are your soul. And God has joined together the body and the soul together. He made our body first. Interesting, right? He made us out of the dust of the ground first before he breathed the breath of life into us, right? And we were meant for eternity, right? What was in the garden? The tree of life, right? We were meant for eternity. And what did that eternity mean? What did God do in the garden? He walked through in the cool of the day, right? Man had fellowship with God, communion with God. What was the only thing that was not good in creation? The man was alone. So he created a companion for man. So we were meant to be in horizontal relationship with one another, in vertical relationship, perfect fellowship and communion with our body and our soul in the garden. And we were to work the garden before the fall. We were to work the garden with no thorns, right? We were to subdue creation and all that kind of stuff. Your body is not a prison for your soul. Your identity is not just your soul, it is your body. Plato said, the souls fall to earth and inhabit our bodies and stuff, and it's not really real, not really reality, and that was just crazy. That's nothing, the Bible's nothing like that, but that kind of thinking, Gnosticism and stuff falls into us all the time in our culture, that we are not our bodies, or our bodies are not really who we are. We can do whatever we want to with them. We both worship them and also hate them. You can worship your body and do all kinds of things to it, and you also say, my body's against me because it has a Y chromosome and I should be an XX chromosome. I'm really a woman inside. Even I think, therefore I am is neurochemical, right? We don't think apart from the brain, which is created out of dust and is neurotransmitters and chemicals and electrical impulses. It's the most complicated thing ever created, and we'll probably never really understand it. And we were created in the image of God. No disability, no limitation of our bodies takes away from our humanity and takes away from being made in the image of God. And humans have screwed that up for centuries, for all of life, treating people who are disabled or have limitations or who are different or whatever, racism, that kind of thing, as something subhuman, not fully human. Where does death come from? The curse, right? So death entered because man sinned, right? Just as sin came into the world through one man, death through sin, so death spread to all men because all sinned, Paul says in Romans 5. Death is, or sin is cosmic treason, right? And sin rips at the fabric of creation, of the big C creation. And death rips at the fabric of creation. It was not natural. Death is not meant to be. It is not natural. It rips, it tears, it destroys. It's violent. It's ugly. It's horrible. And no matter how much we sanitize it, death is horrific and horrible and painful for the person and for all those around them, right? You don't die from natural causes. You may die because of old age, but it's not natural. That's how we talk, though, right? You sanitize it. It's disruptive. The Bible can be looked at, and God can be looked at as creating order out of chaos. Creation, redemption of Israel, redemption of humans, the final eschatology, new heaven and new earth. God brings order out of chaos. Healing, healthcare, medicine is bringing order out of chaos. You are dying. I'm dying right now. Since the moment you were born, the moment you conceived, you started to die. It's not pleasant to think about. You're going to be an hour closer to death when you finish this, and a day closer to death today than you were yesterday. This is what we're really talking about. Memento mori means remember death. Remember you're going to die. Right? But so it's not natural. And so healing is bringing order out of chaos. Your natural decline is your whole immune system, your body is spending a huge proportion of its metabolism, especially once you're not a child anymore, in keeping you alive. Not just energy to move, but keeping the millions of bacteria that live in and on your body from killing you. You spend tremendous resources in maintaining order out of chaos and maintaining health and preventing death. So we're all on that. Yeah, we're all postponing death. And it's horrific because poof, the person is not there anymore. And there's this shell. And so all of humanity wonders, what was consciousness? What was the soul? What was the spirit? What's this body? What's this shell? And I believe, and we developed back in medical school, a whole healthcare Bible study, a theology of health and disease, that it's really just, well, it's because of judgment, right? Death is judgment against sin. So what does man try to do according to Romans 1? Forget. We don't want to remember that there's judgment, right? This is the ultimate judgment. And so that's why we sanitize death, because we don't want to remember death is a reminder of God's judgment. If death is a reminder of God's judgment, does that make anything good out of it? Is it gracious that there's death? Right. The Bible is full of that language. Even Jesus in being prepared, and you weren't ready for my coming, and that kind of thing. So what kind of death was it that they died? On the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. On the day they ate of it, what happened? Right. They were cast out of the garden, right? So no longer fellowship and communion with God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Right. And they did physically die, but not. Are there people in the Bible who didn't physically die, who were taken up into heaven? Yeah, at least 2, right? So they lost fellowship and communion with God. They lost perfect fellowship and communion with one another. Creation was cursed, and the life of man was cursed, and they started to die on that day. But it was spiritual death, right? So death can remind us we're going to die and face judgment one day, and need to be ready. But what does death also remind us of? What kind of death? Physical death reminds us of spiritual death, right? So the fact of this whole thing is God uses to draw us back to himself, and to show us what is going to be one day, what Jesus has really done. So Jesus defeated death, right? We don't have to go into all of that. You know all this, right? And in the final days, death and Hades were thrown to the lake of fire, the second death. So Jesus has conquered sin and death. The last enemy is destroyed. We will be free one day from this imperfect body, and free when we die from our sin, right? We're free when we're redeemed by Christ. We are free from the power of sin and the judgment of sin. But yet, like Paul, we still sin, right? But we'll be free from that when we die. So Christ's victory over death completely transforms death, right? It's no longer the end, for one thing. Separation of your body and soul are not permanent. Your body's decay now has a remedy. Death now is the death of corruption and death of death itself. That's what Paul says, right? Death has been defeated. Death has died. The Revelation, death is cast into Hades, right? Or death dies. So we must die. We no longer die so that we can cease to live, but so that we can live again, right? Put on incorruptibility and immortality. And what do you find in Revelation? The tree of life, right? It is a full circle in that sense, that this is what God is restoring, a perfect fellowship with him, the perfect fellowship with one another, and our bodies, right? So Christ has a body. Christ is appeared to his disciples after his resurrection with a body. He ate and drank, right? He ascended into heaven. So Christ right now has a body in heaven. And we will have a body like his someday. So we will be reunited with our bodies. Perfect, not imperfect, not subject to decay, and that sort of thing. And Paul goes into all of this in First and Second Corinthians and other places. And so what does Paul say? The suffering and the things we face now cannot be compared with the glory that is to be revealed, right? In Romans 8. So now we have we have to live in this present age, right? This already and not yet. What do we have? We have, we mourn, we grieve, but not as those without hope. So we have this promise. We have John giving us in Revelation. The Bible ends with this picture of what's going to happen. You know, people complain, including me, that God doesn't tell us what's going to happen. But he gives us the big picture, the parts that matter. He's told us what's going to happen. This glorious thing is going to happen. New heavens and new earth come. New Jerusalem comes down to earth, and creation is redeemed, and the earth is redeemed, and man's body is redeemed, and we are as we were meant to be. It's coming, and now we have hope. So when we mourn, we don't mourn as those who have no hope, right? And we already talked about this. What gets us screwed up, and what gets our culture screwed up, is they redefine what a person is, and what man is, and what our purpose is. And if your sole purpose is to be the best person you can be, actualize yourself, whether it's man, woman, decide who you are, then you get into all sorts of errors, whether it's abortion or whether it's euthanasia or lots of other things. So we have that hope, and we look to that. Now, the interesting thing is, I can't really think of, and Flory couldn't really think of, many sermons and talks we've heard on dying well or preparing for death. And that's no criticism of any of the churches we've been in. It just doesn't seem to be talked about very much. But I Googled it a little bit and didn't find much. I typed Ligonier in death, and there's Ligonier articles on it. And apparently January 25 was on death, which I have not read. But so it's out there. But how do we live in light of this? Not just medical decisions or other decisions, but how do we live as Christians in light of this? There's an interesting commentary on Ecclesiastes, and it's not really a new thought on Ecclesiastes, but it's called Living Life Backward. And the point of Ecclesiastes, he says, and others have said, is that the point of Ecclesiastes is to look at the end. Everything's a vapor, a mist, a shadow, fleeting, right? Not vanity in the way we mean vanity. It's fleeting. You can't grasp it. It's a mystery. You're never going to understand why the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer. You never understand really a lot of these things. So how do you live in light of that? Ecclesiastes says live life backward. Live life now. Enjoy what God has given you. Honor God. Walk with God. Serve others. Because you're going to die. And your death is going to be meaningless, and no one's going to remember you after a generation or two. You will be forgotten. So how do you live now? Live life backward. Live up with that in view. And Jesus talked about that in some of the parables. Paul talks about it a little bit, but Ecclesiastes really brings that sort of message home. It's some of the Psalms too. But you live your life in light of that reality, in light of that hope, and in light of your earthly life is going to end. So it turns out there's a long tradition of this that I really wasn't even aware of until recently. In the 1400s, there was the time of the Black Death and social upheaval and everything else. And realized, back in the days, death was much more common experience for everybody, right? Women died in childbirth all the time. People lived to their 30s and 40s and died. Children died all the time. Chances are you had brothers and sisters who died if you're a child.
Most of the people physically dug graves actually dealt with that body. Now we have a funeral parlor.
We've sanitized it that way too, yes. And they die in the hospital, not at home. You know, and back in the day, your grandma died in her bed upstairs, you know, in your house with her children and grandchildren and great grandchildren, right? That doesn't happen. That's part of that whole process of sanitizing death, so we don't have to think about judgment. Think about what it is and protect ourselves and protect our children from it, which is not good. So all these people died all the time, but you know, I have to say, you know, 100% of people died then, and 100% of people die now. So it's not really any worse. Like, you know, the lifespan was shorter, and you experienced it more then, partly because it was there in your house, and you had to go take care of it instead of paying somebody else to do it. So, so they wrote a book called Ars Moriendi, The Art of Dying Well, one of the first books printed on movable type. It was extremely popular in the 1400s, The Art of Dying Well. And it's written from a Christian perspective. And Erasmus wrote a book, a treatise on dying well. The English church wrote a thing on dying well in the 1600s. There was this whole thing about learning how to die well. The Christians were supposed to be, part of it was preparing, like Jesus said. Part of it was, are you ready to meet the Lord? But part of it was dealing with your family and understanding death and why, and what is your hope, and the art of dying well. The craft of dying, it was called in England. My only real experience with this really is Floria and I were at 10th Pres in Philadelphia when Dr. Boyce announced he had cancer and then died a few weeks later. And he gave this talk at the beginning, right before the call to worship. This has been published in some books and that kind of thing. But, you know, he said, you know, pray for me, that's great. But I want you to pray for healing. He said, it seems a miracle. He said, it seems to me that the God who could work miracles could have prevented me from getting cancer in the first place. So I'm not really sure that's what you should pray for. Maybe you should pray for God to be glorified. He did not deliver Jesus from death. He delivered Jesus through death. And he clearly had this picture. And he loved Romans. He loved Romans. The end of chapter 11, from him and to him and through him, all things to him be glory forever and ever, was like his motto. So God should be glorified in this. That's the most stunning example I know of dying well. And then you have Memento Mori, which is a movement that kind of happened after that, and is still around today. And the Ecclesiastes book is kind of along that same line. But they had art, and they had music, and they had jewelry. If you look at the lyrics of some of the music at the time in the medieval times, it's about death, and it's about remembering you're going to die. And the Bible says this, teach us to number our days when we get a heart of wisdom. He tells them in Genesis, you're going to return to the ground. From dust you shall return. I think this is David's Psalm in 39. I think David wrote this. Lord, make me known my end and what measure of my days. Let me know how fleeting I am. Behold, you have made my days a few handbreadths. My lifetime is as nothing before you. Surely all mankind stands as a mere breath. Surely a man goes about as a shadow. Surely from nothing they are in turmoil. A man heaps up wealth and does not know who will gather. Or Ecclesiastes, it is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. So that's not an unbiblical principle of remember you're going to die. I don't know about wearing a ring, but they wore rings and wore jewelry that said, remember you're going to die. Why though? Why do you need to remember you're going to die? So you can live well, right? So you can live today. Very briefly, the problems I think we have with a lot of this, we don't like dependence. We don't like being dependent on other people anymore. We don't have extended families all living together. We are rugged individuals, especially in America. Now we're radical individuals, but we're rugged individuals. And we do it yourself, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of mentality. We don't want to be dependent on others. And babies, children, and people who are dying are dependent on others. We don't like that. We think we are our ultimate end, so we don't think about serving others. Now, you think about ending your own life. So you say you have cancer or something like that. You end your life early. Do people think about the effect that has on their family? on others? Do they think what service they can be to their church or to their family before they die? Do we as a culture think about others rather than ourselves, especially when faced with death or something like that? It's radically selfish. Suicide is radically selfish. Ending your life early is radically selfish. We don't think about serving God. What can I do in the time I have to serve God? And I don't think we know how to lament. We don't really have time to talk about this, but I don't think we know how to lament anymore. Death is, yes, we have hope, but we don't know how to help people mourn and grieve and let them mourn and grieve. And I see myself do it to patients and to my children and to my family and to friends and probably some of you. We come at people with platitudes. People who are mourning and grieving and suffering Christians, they know their hope is in heaven. They know these. They don't need you to come tell them, well, at least your hope's in heaven. But we tend to do that because we want to fix it. We want to make it better. We don't want them to be in pain. And we're not comfortable with silence, and we don't know what to say. The Bible is full of lament. We have a whole book called Lamentations, right? The Psalms are full of lament. We have to know how to help people, come alongside them in their pain and suffering, which is real, and let them work through their pain and suffering and be with them and not try to correct it or fix it. But I don't think we know the language of lament anymore. I don't think we know how to help people lament anymore. And we talked about the other issues. Physical death is not the ultimate. Physical life is not the ultimate. Glorifying God is the primary goal, not ourselves. And we should live in light of our death. And then end of life issues, you have to have wisdom on how to apply, not killing, but also not prolonging suffering endlessly. We've talked about this before. That requires a lot of wisdom in individual circumstances. But I think for us, we need to learn how to be dependent on others. We need to learn how to lament. We need to learn how to die well. And we need to remember death. You're closer now than you were when I started. And so am I. So let's pray. Our Lord and our God, we thank you that you have redeemed us and saved us from ourselves, from our sin, that you have created a glorious new body for us one day, that we will be with you in communion and fellowship with one another in perfect communion and fellowship. Thank you for the promises you give us and the life you give us now and the restoration and healing you bring us now. Help us to all live today in light of your truth and what you've revealed to us that is to come. For your honor and glory and the witness of your great name to those around us, we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.